Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've got a couple red wiggler bins that need to be fed. I've got these two oldest of my red wiggler bins. They're not the ones that are on the list for today. The ones that need feeding are the ones that are right here, the newest one and the second newest one. So of the four, the two newer ones are the ones that are due for feeding. It's been a week since I last fed them. And one thing I remember for sure when I was in here last was that I saw a lot of little itsy bitsy tiny little creepy crawly white creatures. I couldn't even tell what they were so tiny. And and to try to eliminate them or try to reduce their numbers if possible, I had actually resorted to the attempt of even drying out the one bin in which I saw the greater number of these things. So I had actually removed the plastic that normally covers the contents of the container to try to prevent excess evaporation from occurring, in the hopes that the material in here might dry out a little bit and it might result in a reduction of those little creatures. So I've not looked into these bins since a week ago when we last observed those little things, and so far the only attempt I've done was to try to allow the bin to dry off a little bit by removing the plastic. So I typically take little baby steps when I'm trying to troubleshoot and address an issue. So we'll see if it's helped any. Typically it's when we start brushing some of the drier material off the top aside that we see the more moist material right below it creeping and crawling with that stuff. So I think we'll be able to tell right away once we get into this bin to see if that's helped any. The other bin still has plastic on it because it wasn't as severe in that bin as it was in here. So this was the only one I really tried doing the troubleshooting and the remedy with. So we're going to get into feeding these two bins, and we'll also get to see if things have improved any with regards to those little creepy crawlies. So let's get to work on these. Now, some people had suggested that another possibility is that maybe things were getting acidic and that was the reason those little creepy crawlers were thriving. So I've resorted back to having a supply of eggshell on hand. So the eggshell serves not only as grit to help the digestion of the worms, but it also has the capability of balancing your pH. If you find that things are too acidic, it can help neutralize some of the acidity in the bin, if in fact that is what was causing the outbreak, or what I perceived to be something of an outbreak. I'm curious to see what we're going to see in here. So now I've also got my phone here that I thought I might be able to get some close-up shots with, because the phone definitely does a nice job on zeroing in on nice close-up video of stuff. So I'm just going to position the phone nice and close to the point where it's still able to focus. Then I'm going to start brushing stuff back to see if we can get a glimpse of what it is that I was referring to previously. I think we can definitely see them in there. They're still there in pretty great numbers. I'm not sure if they're more visible this way with the extreme close-up using my phone, but you can see that they're still cruising around in here in pretty significant numbers. Let's try brushing a little more aside and see if we can see more of them. Not sure if it's possible to get closer than this, but it's definitely a better view this way of what I'm talking about. So I mean, when I don't look at it through that super zoom macro close-up, things don't appear that bad. I mean, when I was able to see it much more readily with the naked eye last time than I can see it now. Although when I was looking at it through the zoom or the macro close-up of the phone, it definitely seemed like there was quite a number of them. But it was with my naked eye that I had really spotted them initially. It made me kind of do a double take So I think just from the initial glance, I don't think I'm seeing quite as many of them, although maybe I just haven't gotten to a spot where there's as many of them. Here too, the material's a little more moist right above where this food was, where all the worms are gathering. And maybe it is the moisture that they're drawn to. So, whatever. Just wondering what the heck this is that it's creating such a stir. This is a hunk of cantaloupe rind. It's funny too, because I think it was up on Reddit in one of the composting forums that somebody had done something almost just like this, where they took half of a cantaloupe, placed it in their bins, and all the worms cruised in there to get a piece of that melon, and then they kind of got trapped in there because the rind, was kind of thick. So here we got a nice pile of worms all hanging out on this cantaloupe rind, pigging out on it. So let's leave them be. I'm going to cover them up so they don't feel inclined to stop eating, stop enjoying their meal on my account. And here too we've got a pretty good number of them, and I would assume at this point this is really just worms gathering for the drippings right beneath the cantaloupe. So as we can see, the cantaloupe is definitely a popular spot for the worms when we're feeding. And as luck would have it, they're getting more today. So they should be pretty happy about that. I don't remember what else we fed when we were last in here. These look like they might just be more pieces of cantaloupe rind, off which most of the meaty stuff has been stripped. So I guess I'm going to just pile up these food bits that we're extracting now as we're opening up the new hole to feed in. And these new bins of mine are nice, fun bins to check in on because they are pretty heavily populated. So we know that we're always going to encounter a good number of worms when we check in here. Trying to see if there's some sort of a rhyme or reason to what I'm doing here. I figured maybe I would push the worms off one side and put the food scraps and bedding I locate along the way on the other side. So then when it comes time to rebuild this feeding zone, I have easy access to the stuff that I pulled out of here. Although sometimes I kind of think about being organized as an afterthought after I've already tossed stuff all over the place. Just seemed like it would be a sensible idea to try to keep all of this bedding type material that I plucked out of the feeding zone along with the food and the worms and try to return it back into the feeding zone when we're rebuilding it at the end. So yeah, we got ourselves a nice active bin here. I think, I'm trying to remember now how old these bins are. I did glimpse at my tracking spreadsheet before I came down here, but I can't really recall the age of these bins at this point. Here too, I keep kind of noticing how the whole surface of the material seems to move with these little itsy bitsy creatures, these little insects, I believe they are. Although I think some people might have even said that they're not insects. I've heard a number of different ideas on what they might be, but it didn't seem like any one person came through as being definitive about what we're seeing here. Although it doesn't seem to me like it's really a severe matter at this point. I'm not too concerned about it. In fact, I would almost say that if the lighting were a little bit more dim, or if I wasn't trying so hard to see what I see, I might not even notice them. In the past, I probably had them right there in front of me, and I never even took note of it, so I'm not going to sweat it too much. Alright, I guess my main objective here was to sort of create an opening that we could place today's feeding into. I think we've accomplished that, so we don't have to go overboard. And this is the older of the two bins. This bin actually did get fed using this method that I'm going to use today about a month ago, and then I sort of stopped doing it for about a month, but I've decided I'm going to continue on that same road. And really the method that I'm referring to is using an approach that just by its nature includes bedding, because what you're doing is taking this nice big piece of paper and placing the food right inside of it. And just by the nature of using that approach, you are ending up with a pretty good generous portion of bedding to go hand in hand with the food. So I'm going to use this burrito wrapping method, or whatever it's called, to create two nice big mounds of food in here. It seemed like I had adequate space to put two of these in here side by side. So I would almost say that first burrito or wrapper, whatever you want to call it, had about the equivalent of almost two handfuls, at least a handful and a half, and same here, a handful and a half or so. So I would almost have to guess that we've applied about 3 or so handfuls of food. In the past I had started using a handful as sort of a measure for how much food I'm placing into my bins. So I'm thinking maybe we just start to restore some of this bedding material that we pulled out along the way down into the hole. And then let's see, I think we had some food scraps here too. We had this little piece of leftover cantaloupe that they're still working pretty much over here. Here too, I think this was just worms. I don't think it was any food there. I think it was just a pile of worms that I pulled out of the feeding area. And you know what? Oh, before we cover everything up here, a couple more things I'd like to include in today's feeding. It's going to be the grit. So whether it's moisture or whether it's acidity, I don't know. But hopefully if it's acidity, maybe the eggshell grit will help reduce it to a certain point. And a little twist to what I usually do. A lot of times when I break out the half and half container, I'm applying coffee. And I'm going to be applying coffee, but today it's these old packets of coffee that I've been holding on to these things for ages. A buddy of mine gave them to me. And let's dump these out. I've got 2 of them, so each bin will get 1. They're from a convenience store. So they're actually the packets that are used to create the coffee service, but I guess maybe they were so old that they got discarded. I'm not even sure where these originated from. I think my buddy's sister obtained them somehow, because she might have known somebody who worked at the establishment where these coffee packets originated from. But I think the last time I tried using one of these was a couple years ago, so it doesn't occur to me how to open one of these. So I think I better go grab my scissor. Unfortunately, I've got a scissor right here next to me so that we can easily open up this container and drop in today's portion of coffee. And the coffee that usually goes into my containers is still damp, I put it into my little half and half containers while it's still damp after I pull it out of the coffee machine, but this stuff's going in dry. So I think between the paper that's going in as well as this dry coffee, maybe it's also going to help sop up a little bit of the moisture that's occurring in this bin, and maybe that too will help steer things in the right direction, if it is in fact moisture that's causing this little outbreak of whatever these creepy crawly creatures are. So let's, I think we have a greater pile of material over on this side, so let's start bringing it back. Oh yeah, and this is where we put the worms too, right? So we should see a little worm action as we start bringing material back over. I guess that's going to give us a chance to peek into this edge over here too. These really heavily populated bins are always fun to check out, because it's always out here on the far edges of my bins where I start to see very little worm activity and things get kind of dry and desolate. But in this case, it seems like the bin is still quite active over on that far edge. I'm sure if we check down in here too, we'll see something similar. Yeah, this is just a really densely populated bin. And it doesn't seem to matter where you look, whether it's right where the most recent feeding was, or even in the spot that's furthest from where the most recent feeding was. It seems like we're always going to see a whole boatload of worms in here no matter where we check. So I think we've hopefully sufficiently submerged the most recent feeding. And it's funny because this is the other packet, s'mores. So this actually has like a, it's a sweet, and that's I think the reason it never got consumed either by my buddy or by myself. I think by the time it came my way, it was already very old, and it was really always intended for the worms here. It was never really intended to be consumed, but I guess since that s'mores flavor coffee isn't really up my alley, it did seem like it would be best just to give it to the worms. And I did once feed it before, and it gives the whole bin kind of this chocolatey smell because of the s'mores flavoring. Although I don't smell it now that we've covered things up, but it's just funny because it's so different from what I normally put into my bins. So here we are with the oldest of the two bins that we're dealing with today. Certainly not the oldest of my red wiggler bins, but the oldest of my two newer red wiggler bins. And I guess we'll see how things progress with regards to these little creepy crawlies we've been observing in here. So now it's on to the newest of my red wiggler bins. Let's get that one fed too. Alrighty. Now I can't remember. This one, for some reason, I think less than 1 month old is what rings a bell in my mind. I believe last time we checked in here it was still 20 days old, 1 day shy of being 3 weeks old. So that means today it would be 1 day shy of being 4 weeks old. So maybe it's 27 days old at this point, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Like I said, I didn't check my tracking spreadsheet before I came down here today. I guess the one downside to using a piece of plastic that's this color is that the worms are like camouflaged on it. I can't see them hardly. So I typically try to remove any worms from materials that I'm removing from the bin while I feed. So I just don't want them crawling off that material and ending up somewhere where they're going to just dry out and die. But I think if we try to speed this along, then maybe we'll be able to get that plastic back in place before any worms try to walk off of it. I guess what we've got going on here, it looks like snow. Looks like it snowed down here in this bin, but that's really mold. So I think that's just another indication of a lot of moisture going on here. Maybe even a little more moisture than we need. But I don't think it's really anything to worry about, because typically mold is something that the worms consume. So I probably shouldn't be worried about it. Talking about interesting odors, kind of like the interesting odor we're going to get when we put the s'mores coffee in here. I'm smelling. It might be the cereal that we placed in here last time. It's kind of like a sweet sort of a smell. I doubt that it's the mold. I'm wondering if it could be that cereal that we dropped in here. The cereal kind of had like a, I don't know if it's brown sugar or molasses or some sort of a sweetened flavor to it, but something in here is giving this bin sort of a sweet smell. And I believe this is kind of what we observed last time too, was that there were still leftovers in here to a certain degree. I guess that's what we're seeing here again. Here again we've got a chunk of leftover cantaloupe. And I guess this time I didn't really take care to try to scoop the worms out with them. This looks like all the the worms that were hanging out on the cantaloupe. Yeah, we got a fair number of leftover bits of food here. Fairly sure that this apple was not part of the last feeding. I think it was actually leftovers from 2 feedings ago. So it almost makes me wonder if skipping a feeding in this bin might make the best sense, because there's so much left in here. When you look around and you see how many worms are occupying this container, you would think, well, maybe best just to give this bin a little bit of food at least, even if it's not much, just to make sure that things don't start to run out. It's just weird, you know, because I do try to match up my bins that I think are going to progress at a similar pace in a similar way. And I usually pick them as a pair because they're similar, because they've got, you know, similar, I don't know, quantities of material in them, or similar amounts of worms, or whatever the case may be. Or sometimes maybe those similarities aren't even all that prevalent, but in the case of these 2 bins that we're feeding today, I did sort of try to envision them as sort of sister bins that get managed in tandem with one another, so that I can observe the progress of one and compare it to the other as I go. And I'm torn, you know, do I add more food? Is it necessary? It does seem like there's quite a bit of food in here. But, you know, I guess if you're a regular on my channel, you probably already know what I'm going to decide. I typically don't go this far and then decide to bail out. I typically feed, even if it's just a little bit, just for good measure. And the stuff that you add most recently is just going to be there to back that up, I guess. So let's just add some food, but not much. I think I'm going to just keep this feeding fairly limited, and we're going to treat this as more of like a, I guess more of like a supplement to the bedding that's in the bin. And I think you saw that there's a fair amount of bedding in here too, so that's not even a problem. So I think we'll create a couple smaller size food rolls for these little guys in here. And that should be adequate, I think. So we're not going to go overboard. We'll just give each bin a little variety of stuff. It'll give us a reason to get rid of that other package of s'mores coffee. And then I guess we'll see what we get in another week's time. I guess we can start returning some of these older food bits down low into the feeding area before we start covering things up. Just don't want to end up with a bunch of food scattered across the top. And well, you know, I do have a box with some leaves in it, and even though we didn't apply leaves to the previous bin that we just fed, it seemed like we had enough casting type material to cover up with in that one. I'm questioning whether this newer of my 2 bins has enough casting material with which I can cover up the feeding area. Although these scraps of paper that we pushed aside earlier seem like they're doing a pretty good job covering things up, but I just have this sense that I probably scattered all kinds of food, you know, like these cantaloupe rinds. I got a feeling that there's all kinds of food scattered out here on the surface. And I always worry that, you know, having food out on the surface is going to create a haven for any sort of flying insects cruising by that might take an interest in it. So I don't want to create a space that any sort of insects might be drawn to. So I think also before we finish up, I'm starting to question whether this is a bit excessive. We're going to just go ahead and put this coffee in, but before we do, let's include a little grit again. The past few feedings, there's not been much grit included in any of my feedings because I had run out, but I've got a fresh supply now, so I'm back to the grit application as normal. Poor little guy got covered in grit and just got covered in coffee too. So hopefully it's not going to be a problem for this little guy. I'm sure he'll find his way out of here. Find himself some more comfortable material to hang out in. So yeah, you know, I'm starting to get this feeling like a nice coating of leaves across the top of this container might be a smart thing to do. I guess I can also try to use some of this material that's out on the edges that might not have as much food substance mixed into it as the stuff that's been stirred up out of the feeding area. So let's see if we can get some of that in here too. Just such an interesting combination of odors coming out of this, because we had that kind of sweet smell we observed in the very beginning when I started opening things up in here, and now in combination with that there's the odor of the s'mores coffee. It's just so unusual, so different from what I'm used to in my worm bins. So sticky, so much moisture in here. It's not so much the castings being stuck to my glove. I just want to make sure I'm not taking any worms for a ride on my glove, because once we finish here, the next place I go is going to be the sink, and then any worms mixed up in the castings on my gloves are just going to end up getting flushed down the drain. So I think before we cover up, we're going to add some leaves. I guess the leaves are also another something I can use to try to brush off some of this casting material off my glove. Keep it in the worm bin rather than rinsing it off. And I don't feel like we need a tremendous amount, but I just feel like I'd have a little bit of a peace of mind if I knew that I had a little bit more cover. In this bin, some fresh cover, so I'm not leaving all kinds of edible materials out on the top surface. You know, with the presence of all these sticks and stems, you know, the stem of each leaf is something that's going to take a little longer to break down in your worm bin, but I don't worry too much about it when I'm adding a whole bunch of this stuff to a newer bin of mine. And with this being the newest of my red wiggler bins, I know there's plenty of time for those little sticks and stems to break down. But as my bins get older and closer to the point where I'm going to be wanting to harvest them, I usually try to steer away from tougher, harder materials like that, so as not to be left with a bunch of little sticks and stems in my finished compost. Usually I'll drive towards trying to use a softer type of a bedding material as my bins age. But for a bin that's still this young, the newest of my red wiggler bins, I think we're still in good shape using a whole bunch of leafy matter like that. So, alright, there we go. My two newest red wiggler bins are now fed. And even though this bin looks like it's got a huge number of worms in it, for some reason it just doesn't seem like it's keeping pace with the other bin. I don't know why. It's interesting. So it's pretty generous feeding in here. I'm really wondering if the next time we come in here to feed, we might end up just skipping feeding this one. Or maybe we just wait with both, and maybe we just let both of them ride for a little longer than just a week next time before we come back in here to feed. So, all right, everyone, we got a little bit of cleaning up and putting away of things to take care of here, but I'm not going to bore you with that. I'm just going to take this as a chance to say really quick before I shut the camera off, thank you. Thank you so much for sticking with me and watching my video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to give me a quick thumbs up. And also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's always really appreciated too. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.